Case 1. Graham Dwyer. Some people believe that if they hide their worst behavior long enough, it disappears. Others learn that records remain and patterns surface. Graham Dwyer lived in one of Dublin's wealthiest suburbs. He worked as an architect, designing large developments across Ireland and Poland. He was married to Gemma and had 2 young children. To colleagues, he was reliable and focused. To neighbors, he was a family man who drove luxury cars and spent weekends flying radio-controlled aircraft. From the outside, his life appeared stable. Away from work and home, Dwyer maintained online profiles under false names. He spent time on adult websites and began searching for someone who would take part in violent fantasies. In late 2007, he made contact with Elaine O'Hara. Elaine was 36 years old. She worked in childcare and lived in Dublin. She had struggled with mental health issues since her teenage years and had been diagnosed with depression and borderline personality disorder. She had been admitted to hospital several times. Her mother died suddenly in 2002. 5 years later, her psychiatrist passed away, removing one of her few sources of support. By the time she met Dwyer online, Elaine was isolated and looking for connection. They first spoke through a website that catered to alternative lifestyles. Dwyer used the name Architect72. Elaine's profile was Help36. Their exchanges grew frequent. Over 2008, they sent thousands of messages. What began as online communication became a relationship built around control and submission. Over time, the encounters became physical. Dwyer introduced knives. Yuka audio recordings later recovered by investigators showed the harm Elaine endured. Their contact slowed, but in March 2011, Dwyer reached out again. This time he used a prepaid mobile phone. He obtained secret phones for both of them. These devices were kept separate from their regular lives and used only to communicate with each other. The messages sent between those phones became increasingly alarming. Dwyer described violent acts and spoke about using a knife. Elaine continued to meet him. On August 22, 2012, Elaine O'Hara was last seen leaving Shangana Park in South Dublin. That same day, Dwyer sent a message from his secret phone telling her to go down to the shore and wait. She was never seen alive again. When Elaine failed to appear for work the next day, friends and colleagues grew concerned. With no immediate signs of a crime, police treated the situation as a missing person case. Searches were carried out. Weeks passed, then months. There was no trace. In September 2013, more than a year later, a man walking his dog in the Dublin mountains found human remains on Killikee Mountain. Dental records confirmed they belonged to Elaine O'Hara. The investigation shifted. That same summer, drought conditions caused water levels at the Vartree Reservoir in County Wicklow to drop. Dog walkers noticed objects along the exposed shoreline. 2 Nokia mobile phones were found. Both were still working. When Gardaí examined the devices, they recovered more than 1,300 messages exchanged between them, including the final text sent on August 22, 2012. The messages showed control, violence, and planning. And investigators worked to identify who had used the phones. The texts referenced a newborn daughter, salary cuts, a cycling purchase, and attendance at flying competitions. Each detail matched events in Graham Dwyer's life. Search warrants were obtained for his home and workplace. Additional material linked him directly to the phones. On October 17, 2013, Graham Dwyer was arrested. He denied responsibility. He claimed he had not sent the messages and said someone must have framed him. Phone records placed his work mobile in the same locations as the secret phones at key times. Messages contained information only he could have known. The case went to trial in January 2015 and lasted 10 weeks. Jurors heard recordings of interactions between Dwyer and Elaine. A prosecutor stated that he had planned Elaine's death over many months and used her vulnerability to place her in danger. The defense suggested the encounters may have been consensual or accidental. The jury rejected that position. On March 27, 2015, after several days of discussion, they returned a unanimous guilty verdict. Judge Tony Hunt said he fully agreed with their decision and imposed a life sentence. Jurors were later excused from jury service for 30 years due to the impact of the evidence they had heard. Dwyer appealed. His legal team challenged how mobile phone data had been obtained, arguing that Irish retention laws conflicted with European Union privacy standards. The case moved through the Court of Appeal, the Supreme Court, and the Court of Justice of the European Union. In July 2024, the Ireland Supreme Court issued its final ruling. 7 judges agreed that even without the disputed phone records, there was overwhelming evidence of Dwyer's responsibility. They concluded that he met Elaine on August the 22nd for one purpose only. The conviction stood. Elaine's father, Frank, and her siblings attended every hearing. After the ruling, Frank told reporters he felt relieved that the long legal process had ended. The family said they hoped Elaine could now rest in peace. Graham Dwyer remains in prison, serving his mandatory life sentence. He continues to deny responsibility. His case became a landmark in Irish criminal law, showing how digital evidence can survive even years underwater. What Dwyer tried to keep hidden through secret phones and encrypted messages was revealed through routine investigation and persistence. Yet while this case reached its final ruling, another story was already beginning. Case 2, Sharon Collins. Not everyone who searches online is looking for advice or entertainment. Some are searching for solutions to problems they believe can be removed. In the mid-2000s, Sharon Collins lived in Ennis County, Clare. She was divorced and raising 2 children. For several years, she had been in a relationship with P.J. Howard, a successful businessman who owned a large property development company worth tens of millions of euros. Together, they lived well. They had homes in Ireland, a penthouse apartment in Spain, access to a boat, and financial security. To people around them, their life reflected comfort and opportunity. But the relationship carried strain. Despite years together, Howard would not marry Sharon. His reason was direct, that he wanted his wealth to pass to his 2 sons, Robert and Niall, without legal conflict. For Sharon, that meant uncertainty. No matter how long they stayed together, she would not have automatic access to his assets. That reality shaped what came next. In 2006, Sharon began visiting websites that offered illegal services. Among routine searches, she found a platform claiming to connect clients with people willing to carry out violent acts for payment. Using the email alias Lying Eyes, a name taken from an Eagles song about choosing money over love, Sharon made contact with someone advertising services on a site called hitmanforhire.com. Her messages laid out a plan. First, P.J. Howard's 2 sons would be killed, made to look like accidents. After that, Howard himself would die in a way designed to resemble grief-driven self-harm. With all three gone, Sharon believed she would inherit an estate valued at about 60 million euros. She took steps to support that plan. She obtained a false marriage certificate through eBay. She secured a passport under the name Sharon Howard. The person responding to her emails was SM Aid, an Egyptian poker dealer living in Las Vegas who used the alias Tony Luciano. Aid agreed to the arrangement. They exchanged messages about timing, logistics, and payment. Sharon sent a 15,000 euro deposit. In the summer of 2007, Aid traveled to Ireland with his wife, presenting the trip as a holiday. The stated purpose was to carry out the agreement. What happened next changed the direction of the case. Instead of approaching the Howard family in secret, Aid contacted Robert Howard directly. He demanded 100,000 euros to cancel the contract on Robert, his brother, Beatty, and their father. Robert Howard contacted police. Gardaí opened an investigation. Surveillance began. Officers traced emails and reviewed financial records. They followed communications between Aid and the Lying Eyes account. The evidence led back to Sharon Collins. She was arrested and charged with solicitation and conspiracy. The case went to trial in 2008 and lasted 7 weeks. Jurors heard how Sharon had proposed the deaths of 3 people for financial gain. They were shown email exchanges, bank records confirming the deposit sent to Aid, and detailed communication between Lying Eyes, Down to 8, and the Hitman website. Sharon stated that someone else must have used her identity. When questioned about the 15,000 euro payment, she said it had been sent to stop Aid from sending a damaging email about P.J. Howard, wherein the explanation did not align with the message records. Aid faced his own charges. He was accused of extortion and handling stolen property after attempting to pressure Robert Howard for money. He said he had been hired but chose not to follow through and instead tried to warn the family for payment. Jurors rejected that version. One of the most striking moments came when P.J. Howard took the witness stand. Despite evidence that Sharon had planned the deaths of him and his sons, Howard spoke in her support. He told the court he did not fear her and said he would live with her again if given the chance. He asked the judge not to impose a prison sentence. His statement left many observers stunned. On July 10, 2008, after days of discussion, the jury returned its verdict. Sharon Collins was found guilty of soliciting SM Aid and conspiring against P.J. Howard and his 2 sons. Aid was found guilty of demanding money with menaces and handling stolen goods. On November 4, 2008, Sharon Collins received a 6-year prison sentence. Aid received the same term. Judge Roderick Murphy addressed the seriousness of Sharon's actions, noting that she had attempted to arrange the deaths of 3 people for financial reward. The case became known as the Lying Eyes case. Sharon appealed. In March 2010, the Court of Criminal Appeal rejected all 23 grounds of her challenge. The convictions remained in place. She served about 3.5 years before being released in September 2012 under early release provisions. After leaving prison, Sharon moved to Belfast and spoke publicly about plans to write a book. She continued to deny responsibility. Aid was released around the same time and later extradited to the United States, where he faced related charges. He died in Egypt in July 2022 due to health complications. Before his death, he maintained that Sharon had hired him and called her account untrue. For the Howard family, the damage did not end with the verdict. Robert and Nile Howard lived with the knowledge that someone their father trusted had planned their deaths. P.J. Howard, who had defended Sharon in court, later faced the reality of what she had intended. Sharon Collins' case remains one of Ireland's most striking examples of planned violence driven by money. It showed how online platforms could be used to seek harm across borders, how false documents could be obtained with ease, and how financial motive can override personal ties. But while Sharon Collins worked through emails and payments, two sisters in Dublin would soon cross a line through direct action. Case 3. Linda Mulhall and Charlotte Mulhall. Some families carry harm across generations. When support systems fail, the effects do not stay contained. They pass from parent to child, shaping choices long before anyone steps into a courtroom. The Mulhall family lived in Kilclare Gardens in Tallaght, South Dublin. John and Kathleen Mulhall raised 6 children in conditions marked by poverty, addiction, and repeated reports of mistreatment. Gardaí later described the household as troubled. John Mulhall was accused of harming Kathleen during their marriage. The children grew up around conflict and instability. The couple separated, but Kathleen's situation did not improve. In 2002, she entered a relationship with Farah Swala Noor. Noor had arrived in Ireland in December 1996, he claiming to be a Somali refugee whose family had died in civil war. He applied for asylum using that account. Later checks showed he was Kenyan, that his family was alive, and that his story had been fabricated. Despite being ordered deported, he appealed and was granted Irish citizenship in March 1999. His criminal record showed repeated incidents involving women. One victim, a 16-year-old with developmental disabilities, became pregnant. Despite multiple charges linked to disorder and violence, Noor did not serve a prison sentence. Gardaí later described him as aggressive toward women. When Kathleen became involved with him, her daughter saw the same pattern they had witnessed growing up. Linda Mulhall was 30 years old in 2005. She had 4 children and had left school early. She had been in a harmful relationship herself. Like her former partner, had beaten her children with electrical equipment, injuries so severe that social services removed them from her care. Linda turned to heroin and alcohol. Charlotte Mulhall was 21. She struggled with substance use and had several minor convictions. Both sisters had grown up in chaos. Both had watched their mother suffer. By early 2005, none of them were stable. On March 20th, 2005, during the St. Patrick's Day holiday weekend, Kathleen, Linda, Charlotte, and Noor spent the day drinking in Dublin city center. They bought alcohol and consumed it while moving through the streets. Tablets were also taken. By evening, they returned to Kathleen's rented flat at Richmond Cottages in Summerhill. All 4 were heavily impaired. According to later statements, Noor began making unwanted advances toward Linda, touching her and making explicit comments. Linda told him to stop. Kathleen intervened. Noor refused. The situation escalated. Kathleen made a statement to her daughters. "Please just end this for me." Charlotte picked up a Stanley knife and attacked Noor. As he moved toward a bedroom, Charlotte followed. Linda joined in, striking Noor's head several times with a claw hammer. Noor died at the scene from combined injuries. What happened next defined the case. Instead of calling emergency services, the sisters decided to remove the body. They dragged Noor into the bathroom and spent several hours cutting his remains into smaller parts, using knives and a saw. Investigators later said parts of his body were removed as an act of retaliation. They placed the remains into black refuse bags. Over multiple trips, Linda and Charlotte carried the bags to the nearby Royal Canal, disposing of sections of Noor's body in the water. They handled the head differently. They took it by bus to Talat, buried it, later dug it up, damaged it with a hammer, and buried it again. Noor's head has never been recovered. For 10 days, no missing person report was filed. On March 30th, a passerby noticed something floating in the Royal Canal near Croke Park. At first, it was assumed to be debris. Then someone saw a sock still attached. It was a human leg. The Garda Sub-Aqua unit was called in. Officers recovered 7 separate body parts. The torso had 22 stab wounds. Identifying the remains proved difficult without the head. Progress came when a distinctive T-shirt found with the torso was recognized by another man from the Somali community, who linked it to Noor. He later received a Crime Stoppers reward. In August 2005, Kathleen Mulhall and her daughters were arrested and questioned. All 3 denied involvement. With no confession and no head recovered, the investigation slowed. Weeks later, Linda contacted Gardaí. Exhausted and frightened, she gave a detailed statement admitting her role. She said Charlotte caused Noor's death and that Kathleen helped clean the flat. Her account reopened the case. Officers searched the Summerhill flat with permission from the new tenant. Bloodstains were found throughout the property. Testing confirmed the blood belonged to Noor. When Gardaí moved to arrest Kathleen again, they discovered she had fled to England. She avoided capture until January 2008. The trial began in October 2006 and drew national attention, and media outlets referred to Linda and Charlotte as the Scissor Sisters, a label taken from the American pop group. Judge Paul Carney presided. He later described the killing as the most grotesque he had encountered in his professional career. Linda Mulhall was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Jurors accepted that while she participated in what followed, Charlotte had caused the fatal injuries. Charlotte Mulhall was convicted of murder and received a mandatory life sentence. Kathleen Mulhall later returned to Ireland. She pleaded guilty to helping clean the scene and withholding information. She received a 5-year sentence. Linda Mulhall was released in January 2018 after serving more than 12 years with remission. She rebuilt her life away from public attention, where Charlotte Mulhall remains in Limerick prison serving her life sentence. Kathleen served her term and is believed to be living in the United Kingdom. The impact extended beyond the courtroom. In December 2005, John Mulhall took his own life after details of the case became public. Their brother, James Mulhall, later received a prison sentence for robbing 2 shops at knife point. Farah Swaleh Noor was 38 years old when he died. His history of harm toward women was documented. That did not change the scale of what followed. The disposal of his body shocked the country and forced renewed discussion about domestic abuse, generational trauma, and how repeated system failures can leave people without safe exits. The Mulhall sisters grew up in violence. They watched their mother endure it. In the end, they became responsible for extreme acts themselves. Their case became a reference point in Ireland for how untreated harm can pass from one generation to the next, and how desperation can lead to irreversible choices. But while this violence happened in a single night, another case would show how betrayal can grow quietly over years. Case 4. Wayne O'Donoghue. Trust often grows through routine contact. In small towns, neighbors share space, time, and responsibility. Parents rely on familiar faces. Children learn who feels safe. Near Middleton in County Cork, the O'Donoghue and Holohan families lived next door to each other in Balmond. Wayne O'Donoghue was 20 years old. He studied engineering at Cork Institute of Technology. He came from a respected family, had a girlfriend named Rebecca Denny, and was viewed as helpful and polite. Next door lived 11-year-old Robert Holohan with his parents, Mark and Magella, and his younger brother and sister. Robert loved his BMX bike. He spent his free time outdoors. Over the years, he formed a close bond with Wayne. Wayne built him a tree house. He kicked a football with him in the yard. He took him into Middleton for ice creams and DVDs. For Robert, who had no older siblings, Wayne filled that role. The Holohan parents welcomed the relationship. They believed their son was safe with someone they knew well. On January 4th, 2005, Robert spent the afternoon riding his BMX around the neighborhood. He called on friends. It was a school holiday. His mother last saw him at about 2:30 p.m. when he left home on his bike. He did not come back for dinner. As evening passed, DeMarc and Magella grew concerned. Robert was not answering his mobile phone. By nightfall, they contacted Gardaí. A missing person investigation began immediately. Neighbors joined search parties. Volunteers arrived from across County Cork. Fields were checked. Outbuildings were searched. People walked roads calling Robert's name into the cold January air. The case made national news. Wayne O'Donoghue was among the first to help search. He spoke with Mark and Magella, telling them Robert would be found. He said he could not understand where the boy might have gone. For 8 days, there was no sign of Robert. On January 12th, 2005, a man walking near Inchstrand, about 20 kilometers from the Holohan home, noticed black refuse sacks in a ditch. Inside was Robert Holohan. He had been wrapped and hidden. Near a post-mortem confirmed he died from asphyxia caused by manual strangulation. The investigation shifted from missing person to homicide. Gardaí reviewed statements, movements, and timelines. They spoke again with everyone who had seen Robert that afternoon. On January 16th, 4 days after Robert's body was found and the day after his funeral, Gardaí received a call from Raymond O'Donoghue, Wayne's father. He told officers his son had something to say. Wayne O'Donoghue admitted responsibility. In his account, he said Robert had been throwing stones at his car around 3:30 p.m. on January 4th. An argument followed. Wayne said he grabbed Robert by the throat with one hand. He said he did not know how hard or for how long he held him. When he let go, Robert fell. Instead of calling for help, Wayne placed Robert's body in the boot of his car. He drove for a time, then took Robert to Inchstrand and hid him in the ditch. He then returned home and joined the search efforts. He spoke to Robert's parents while knowing where their son was. Wayne was arrested and charged. His trial began in November 2005 at the Central Criminal Court sitting in Cork. Wayne pleaded not guilty to murder, but admitted causing Robert's death without intent. Prosecutors focused on what happened after Robert collapsed. They pointed to the disposal of the body, the 8 days of silence, and Wayne's participation in search efforts. They said these actions showed awareness of wrongdoing. The defense focused on Wayne's age, his lack of previous convictions, and his claim that the incident began as an argument that went too far. They said his behavior afterward came from panic rather than planning. Young Mark and Magella Holohan attended every day of the trial. They listened to details about their son's final moments. They heard how Robert had trusted Wayne and had gone with him without fear. After several days of discussion, the jury reached its decision. They found Wayne O'Donoghue not guilty of murder, but guilty of manslaughter. On January 25, 2006, Judge Paul Carney sentenced Wayne O'Donoghue to 4 years in prison, backdated to his arrest. The judge spoke about the serious nature of the cover-up, the transport of Robert's body, Wayne's role in searches, and the lies told to grieving parents. In court, Mark Holohan shouted, "You're a disgrace, boy." Magella Holohan delivered a victim impact statement that went beyond prepared remarks, raising concerns about evidence and unanswered questions. The sentence led to public anger. Yet many believed 4 years did not reflect the age difference between Wayne and Robert, the disposal of the body, and the suffering caused to the Holohan family. The Director of Public Prosecutions appealed the sentence as too lenient. In October 2006, the Court of Criminal Appeal rejected that appeal. Wayne O'Donoghue was released on January 16, 2008, after serving about 3 years with remission. After his release, he issued a public apology to Mark and Magella Holohan, expressing regret for what had happened. The Holohan family did not accept the statement. In the years that followed, Wayne lived quietly and avoided media attention. The Holohan family continued to seek answers to questions they felt remained unresolved. The case changed how many people in Ballyedmond and Middleton viewed safety and trust. It also raised broader debate about sentencing in cases involving children and about how courts balance intent with outcome. For Mark and Magella Holohan, none of those discussions altered the fact that their son never came home from an ordinary afternoon on his bike. Robert Holohan's death marked the end of childhood for many in that community and left lasting damage across both families. Yet while this case centered on a sudden act followed by concealment, another would show how harm can be planned over many years. Case 5, Catherine Nevin. Some people treat marriage as a shared life. Others view it as a financial arrangement, measured in property, income, and control. Jack White's Inn stood along the N11, the main road between Dublin and Wexford in County Wicklow. By the mid-1990s, Tom and Catherine Nevin had owned and run the pub for years. It was a profitable business and a familiar stop for locals and passing traffic. To customers, they appeared to be a hard-working couple who had built something together. Inside the business, roles were clear. Tom Nevin handled finances, suppliers, and maintenance. People who knew him described him as quiet and dependable. Catherine Nevin focused on the social side of the pub. Staff later said she paid close attention to people she believed could help her status, offering meals and drinks to judges and inspectors and other figures she wanted to impress. Their marriage had broken down long before Tom's death. They slept in separate bedrooms. Employees said the relationship was strained. Catherine had several affairs. Tom remained at the pub, keeping the operation running. What Tom did not know was that Catherine had been trying for years to arrange his removal. In 1989, she approached a man named Willie McLean and offered money to have Tom killed. He refused. In 1991, she made similar offers to John Jones and Jerry Heaps, both men with Republican links. Each time she spoke about insurance money and business profits. Each time she was turned down. She did not stop trying. On the night of March 18th, 1996, Jack White's Inn was busy during the St. Patrick's Day bank holiday weekend. After closing, Tom stayed behind to count the takings, and records showed he began totaling the tills at 12:56 a.m. on March 19th. He sat at a kitchen table sorting notes and coins. At about 4:30 a.m., the panic alarm was triggered, sending a signal to Bell Communications Security. Gardaí arrived within minutes. They found Tom Nevin on the kitchen floor. He had been shot once in the chest at close range with a shotgun. Forensic analysis showed he had been seated when he was shot. His hands were raised. A pen was still in his hand. His glasses remained on his face. Catherine Nevin was nearby. She told officers she had been in bed when she heard noise. She said someone forced her face into a pillow and demanded money. She claimed her hands and ankles were tied while intruders searched her room for jewelry. She said she managed to reach the front door and activate the panic button after they left. From the start, parts of the account did not match the scene. More than 16,000 pounds was missing, yet Catherine's bedroom did not show signs of a thorough search. Jewelry was scattered but not taken. There were no marks on doors or windows to show forced entry. Gardaí questioned why Catherine had not gone to Tom's bedroom for help. They also asked why the pub alarm had not been set after closing. The position of Tom's body raised further concerns. The shot appeared controlled, not rushed. Investigators believed he had been targeted while seated. On July 27, 1996, Catherine Nevin was arrested on suspicion of withholding information. The investigation continued for years. Detectives gathered statements and reviewed Catherine's past attempts to hire others to kill Tom. Her trial began on January 14, 2000, and at the Central Criminal Court in Dublin. She pleaded not guilty to arranging Tom's death and to 3 counts of soliciting McLean, Jones, and Heaps. Chief Prosecutor Peter Charlton presented the case. The state did not identify who fired the shotgun. Instead, it relied on circumstantial evidence and testimony from the 3 men Catherine had approached in earlier years. They told the jury that Catherine had offered money and discussed how she would benefit financially if Tom died. The prosecution also outlined Catherine's motive. Tom's death would leave her in control of Jack White's Inn and give her access to assets and insurance worth about £1 million. Each of the 3 men took the stand. Willie McLean, John Jones, and Jerry Heaps all described Catherine asking them to kill Tom, and they said she spoke openly about payment and about inheriting the business. After 5 days of jury discussions, the longest in Irish state history at the time, the verdict was delivered. Catherine Nevin was found guilty of arranging Tom Nevin's death. She was also found guilty by 11-1 majorities of soliciting McLean, Jones, and Heaps. Justice Mella Carroll imposed a life sentence. The media soon gave Catherine Nevin the label the Black Widow. Images of her entering and leaving court became widely known across Ireland. Catherine appealed. In 2003, the Court of Criminal Appeal rejected her challenge. In 2010, she failed in an application claiming a miscarriage of justice. Throughout, she maintained she was innocent. In 2016, after serving 16 years, Catherine became eligible for reviewable temporary release, yet before arrangements were completed, her health declined. She was diagnosed with a terminal condition and transferred to the Mater Hospital in Dublin, then to care facilities as her condition worsened. Catherine Nevin died on February 19, 2018, aged 67, in a North Dublin hospice. She never disclosed who fired the shot that killed Tom. Tom Nevin's siblings spent years in civil court trying to prevent Catherine from receiving any part of his estate. They were successful. Jack White's Inn was later sold for £620,000. The pub continues to operate under the same name. The case remains one of Ireland's most well-known examples of long-term planning, tied to money and control. Over more than a decade, Catherine approached multiple people, offering payment and outlining how she would benefit from Tom's death. Her actions showed persistence, access to informal networks, and a willingness to pursue the same outcome through different paths. For Tom Nevin's family, the verdict did not answer every question. It confirmed responsibility for arranging his death, but not who carried it out. For the wider public, the case raised lasting concerns about how long harmful intent can go unnoticed, even in busy workplaces where many people pass through every day. Yet while Catherine Nevin worked over years to remove her husband, another case would show how betrayal can occur inside a home, hidden within ordinary routines. Case 6. Joe O'Reilly. The hardest lies to detect are often told by people closest to us. In October 2004, Rachel O'Reilly was 30 years old. She lived with her husband Joe in Baldoyle, north of Dublin, and they had been married for 9 years and were raising 2 young sons. They owned a comfortable home. To neighbors and friends, they appeared to be managing family life and work like many other couples. Joe O'Reilly worked as an advertising executive. His job involved regular travel. During that time, he was involved in a relationship with a colleague. Nikki P. Rachel learned about the affair months before her death. Friends later said she was deeply hurt and confused. She confronted Joe and told him to end it. He said he would. He did not. On the morning of October 4th, 2004, Rachel followed her usual routine. She brought her sons to school and nursery, then returned home to their house in Baldoyle. Later that afternoon, Joe's mother arrived to collect the children. Rachel did not answer the door. After entering the house, she found Rachel in an upstairs bedroom. Rachel had been beaten to death. The room showed signs of disturbance. Drawers were open, items were scattered. The scene appeared arranged to look like a burglary. Joe was at work when he received the call. He returned home to find Gardaí present and his mother in shock. He cried openly and told officers he could not understand what had happened. In the days that followed, Joe appeared on television asking for information about Rachel's death. He described her as a devoted mother and asked the public to come forward with any leads. Investigators began reviewing his account of that morning. Joe said he had gone straight to work after leaving home. CCTV footage and witness statements later challenged that claim. Phone records also showed patterns that did not align with his version of events. One key piece of evidence came from a petrol station camera near the O'Reilly home. The footage showed Joe's car on roads he said he had not used that day. Timestamps placed him near the house during the period when Rachel was attacked. Joe said the camera timing must have been wrong. Further checks confirmed it was accurate. Mobile phone records showed his phone connecting to cell towers close to his home at the same time. Records also showed Joe calling Rachel's phone after she had already died, attempts that investigators believed were made to create distance between himself and the scene. Police also reviewed Joe's internet activity. In the weeks before Rachel's death, he had searched for information about forensic evidence, police methods, and how long it takes for a body to be discovered. As Gardaí built their case, they spoke with colleagues who said Joe had appeared distracted and tense, even before news of Rachel's death reached him at work. Nikki P. later cooperated with investigators and confirmed the affair, along with Joe's complaints about feeling trapped in his marriage. Joe maintained his innocence. He said he loved Rachel and would never harm her. He insisted the evidence was circumstantial and that someone else must have been responsible. He was arrested in November 2004 and charged with Rachel's murder. The trial began in June 2007 at the Central Criminal Court in Dublin. Over several weeks, jurors heard about Joe's movements on October 4th. The CCTV footage, phone records, and the staged condition of the bedroom. Expert witnesses explained that the scene did not match typical burglary patterns. The items had been disturbed, but not taken in a way consistent with theft. Prosecutors said Joe left work that morning under false pretenses, returned home after Rachel had arrived back from dropping off the children, attacked her, arranged the bedroom to look like a break-in, then went back to work. They pointed to his calls to Rachel's phone after her death and to his online searches as signs of planning. The defense questioned the reliability of CCTV timing and argued that phone data could be interpreted in different ways. They said there was no direct forensic link placing Joe at the scene beyond what would be expected in his own home. Rachel's parents and siblings attended every day of the trial. They listened to testimony about her final hours and about Joe's actions afterward. After several days of discussion, the jury reached a unanimous verdict. On July 21, 2007, Joe O'Reilly was found guilty of Rachel's murder and sentenced to life in prison. Rachel's family reacted with relief. Joe showed little response as the verdict was read. The case affected both families. Rachel's parents and siblings lost a daughter and sister. Joe's own mother had been the one to find Rachel's body. His children lost their mother and, through his conviction, their father as well. Joe appealed his conviction several times, arguing that the evidence was insufficient or had been presented incorrectly. Each appeal was rejected by Irish courts, which upheld the verdict. He remains in prison serving his sentence. Rachel O'Reilly's death became one of Ireland's most high-profile domestic homicide cases. It led to renewed discussion about how people can present themselves publicly while hiding serious wrongdoing. Friends who had supported Joe in the days after Rachel's death later said they felt misled. They had comforted him while he knew what had happened. For Rachel's sons, the impact extended beyond the courtroom. They grew up without their mother. Their father remains incarcerated. The case showed how routine mournings can turn into permanent loss, and how digital records can reconstruct movements when accounts do not align. Yet while Joe O'Reilly tried to maintain control through lies and staged scenes, another case would show how jealousy can build over time in rural Ireland. Case 7. Patrick Quirk. Jealousy does not always announce itself. Sometimes it grows in routine settings, shaped by access, familiarity, and time. In rural Tipperary, farming depends on cooperation. Neighbors share equipment, help during calving, and rely on each other during long seasons. Families often know one another for generations. It was within this environment that Patrick Quirk built his reputation as a reliable dairy farmer. Patrick Quirk was married and ran a successful operation. After Martin Lowry died suddenly in September 2007, his widow Mary was left to manage her farm while raising 3 children. Patrick stepped in to help. At first, the arrangement focused on practical needs. Over time, their contact deepened. By 2008, Patrick and Mary began a relationship. It was kept quiet. Patrick remained married. Aunt Mary was still processing the loss of her husband while trying to keep the farm running. The relationship did not last. In 2010, Mary ended it. She later met Bobby Ryan, a DJ known as Mr. Moonlight, a nickname linked to a song he often played. Bobby was attentive and supportive. For Mary, the relationship offered stability without secrecy. Patrick did not accept the change. He continued working on Mary's farm through leasing arrangements, which gave him regular access to her property. Friends later said he became fixated on Mary and struggled to accept that she had moved on. On June 3, 2011, Bobby Ryan went to Mary's farmhouse in the morning. His van was left in the driveway. He did not arrive at his next destination. His family reported him missing that day. Gardaí began a search. Bobby's van was found on Mary's property. There was no sign of Bobby himself. Officers and volunteers searched nearby land and waterways. Days turned into weeks, then months. Mary cooperated fully. Patrick also assisted with searches and spoke with Gardaí. He presented himself as concerned, another neighbor hoping Bobby would be found. Nearly 2 years passed without answers. In April 2013, Patrick Quirk told Mary and Gardaí that he had found a body in an underground runoff tank on her farm, a structure used to collect drainage water. Officers examined the tank. Inside were Bobby Ryan's remains. For Bobby's family, the discovery ended a long period of uncertainty. They could finally lay him to rest. For investigators, it raised new questions. Why had Patrick checked that specific tank after almost 2 years? The tank was not part of daily farm work. Patrick said he was preparing to lease additional land and wanted to inspect all facilities. Gardaí noted that the explanation raised concerns. A post-mortem showed Bobby Ryan died from blunt force trauma to the head. The case was re-examined. Investigators reviewed Patrick's access to the farm and his movements in 2011. They looked at his behavior after Bobby's disappearance. Their attention focused increasingly on Patrick. The case against him was circumstantial, built on motive, opportunity, and pattern. Patrick had motive linked to Mary's new relationship. He had opportunity through his ongoing work on the farm. He knew every structure on the property, including the underground tank. Digital analysis added to the picture. Around the time Bobby disappeared, Patrick carried out online searches about decomposition, police methods, and how long bodies remain identifiable. He also searched for information about Mary and Bobby. Gardaí also discovered that Patrick had installed surveillance equipment on Mary's property without her consent. A camera had been placed in her bedroom. Patrick said it was for security. Investigators believed it showed ongoing monitoring of Mary's private life. People who knew Patrick described changes in his behavior after Mary ended their relationship. They said he remained focused on her and spoke about her returning to him. Bobby Ryan stood between Patrick and that outcome. In October 2014, Patrick Quirk was arrested and charged with Bobby Ryan's murder. He denied any involvement. He said finding the body was coincidence and that someone else must have been responsible. The trial began in January 2019 at the Central Criminal Court. It lasted 13 weeks. Jurors heard how Patrick's access to the farm gave him control over the setting. They learned about his online searches, the hidden camera, and his discovery of Bobby's remains after nearly 2 years. The state said Patrick attacked Bobby on the morning of June 3, 2011, likely near the farmhouse when Bobby arrived. They said Patrick then placed Bobby's body in the runoff tank, a location unlikely to be checked, and continued daily life while the search went on. They also pointed to Patrick's role in later finding the body as a final act designed to manage how the case moved forward. The defense said the evidence did not prove Patrick committed the crime. They argued there were no witnesses to any attack and no direct forensic link tying Patrick to Bobby's death. They maintained that Patrick's access to the farm and later discovery of the remains did not establish guilt. After more than 20 hours of discussion across several days, the jury reached its verdict. On May 1st, 2019, Patrick Quirk was found guilty of Bobby Ryan's murder. He received a mandatory life sentence. Bobby's family reacted with relief. Patrick showed no visible response. The outcome left lasting damage across Mary Lowry's life. She had lost her husband to illness. Then she lost her partner to violence carried out by someone she had trusted and allowed onto her property. Her farm became the place where Bobby's body was hidden. Bobby Ryan's family gained answers, but those answers came with the knowledge that their loved one had been attacked and concealed for years. While they searched, Patrick appealed his conviction. In November 2020, the Court of Appeal rejected his challenge, confirming the verdict. He remains in prison. The case showed how fixation can develop over time, supported by access and familiarity. It also demonstrated how someone can take part in searches while knowing where a victim lies. For rural communities, the impact went beyond one family. It forced reflection on how easily trust can be used to gain control of private spaces. Yet while Patrick Quirk's actions unfolded across years, another case would show how violence inside a marriage can escalate in a single morning. Case 8. Ian Lillis. Sometimes the most dangerous point in a failing relationship arrives when one person decides to leave. In December 2008, Ian Lillis and his wife Katrina Innes lived in Howth, an affluent coastal area of Dublin. They had a teenage daughter. Katrina ran a successful advertising business. Ian worked in television production. Their home reflected years of professional success. Inside the marriage, pressure had been building. Katrina had learned that Ian was involved with another woman. She confronted him. Friends later said the weeks that followed were tense. Katrina began speaking with solicitors about separation and discussed her options with people she trusted. For Ian, the prospect of divorce carried financial and personal consequences. Katrina was the main earner in the household. Her income supported their lifestyle and the home in Howth. A separation meant losing access to that stability. On the morning of December 15, 2008, their daughter had already left for school when an argument broke out between Ian and Katrina. And they went into the garden to continue it away from nearby houses. Shortly after 10 a.m., Ian called emergency services. He said an intruder had entered their garden, attacked both of them, and then escaped. When Gardaí and paramedics arrived, they found Katrina lying on the ground with severe head injuries. She had been struck multiple times with a brick taken from the garden. Despite treatment, she did not regain consciousness and died at the scene. Ian had cuts and bruises on his face. He told officers that a masked man had climbed the garden wall, demanded money, then attacked them. He said he tried to protect Katrina but was overpowered, and that the attacker fled. From the outset, Gardaí identified problems with this account. There were no signs that anyone had climbed the wall. No neighbors reported seeing anyone in the area. There were no marks or disturbance beyond the space where Katrina lay. The brick used to strike Katrina came from their own garden. Investigators noted that an attacker arriving from outside would not have brought it. Forensic analysis showed Katrina had been hit repeatedly while on the ground. The pattern of injuries did not align with Ian's description of a brief struggle with an unknown person. Gardaí also reviewed Ian's phone activity. They found he had sent messages to his partner earlier that morning and contacted her again after emergency services had been called. Within hours of Katrina's death, Ian was arrested. During questioning, his story changed. He admitted there had been no intruder. He said that during the argument, he had pushed Katrina. According to his revised account, she fell and hit her head. He then said he panicked and struck her with the brick to make it look like an outside attack. Even this version did not match medical findings. Pathologists said Katrina's injuries reflected sustained force, not a single fall followed by a staged act. Ian was charged with murder. His legal team later asked the jurors consider manslaughter instead, stating that the incident grew from an argument and not from intent to kill. The trial took place in 2010 at the Central Criminal Court in Dublin. Jurors heard about the breakdown of the marriage, Ian's relationship with another woman, and the financial strain linked to a possible separation. They also heard expert evidence on Katrina's injuries and the condition of the garden. The state said Ian attacked Katrina during their argument, used the brick from the garden, and then invented the story of an intruder to avoid responsibility. The defense accepted that Ian caused Katrina's death, but said it followed a push during an argument, followed by poor decisions made in panic. After hearing weeks of evidence, the jury returned its verdict. Ian Lillis was found not guilty of murder but guilty of manslaughter. On March 12, 2010, Judge Barry White sentenced him to 6 years and 11 months in prison. The judge addressed the seriousness of the offense, the breach of trust within the marriage, and the false account given to emergency services and Gardaí. He also took into account the jury's finding on the lesser charge. The sentence drew strong public response. Katrina's family released statements expressing their grief and anger at losing a sister and daughter through violence carried out by her husband. Ian was released in April 2013 after serving just over 2/3 of his sentence with remission. After his release, he avoided public attention. Their daughter faced life without her mother, and with her father having served time in prison. The case became part of wider discussion in Ireland about violence inside relationships and how quickly arguments can lead to irreversible outcomes. It also highlighted how false accounts given in the first hours after a death can shape investigations and court proceedings. For those who knew Katrina Innes, her death marked the loss of a successful professional and a parent whose life ended in the garden of her own home. Yet while this case unfolded over the course of a single morning, another would reveal how deception can be maintained for nearly 2 decades. Case 9. Colin Howell. Most people maintain double lives for years, moving between public respect and private wrongdoing without raising concern. In May 1991, a tragedy in Coleraine, Northern Ireland, appeared to involve 2 families at once. Colin Howell, a dentist, and his wife Leslie were found dead in a car inside a garage, with the engine running. At the same time, Trevor Buchanan, a police officer, was found dead in similar circumstances. Early findings pointed to carbon monoxide poisoning. Investigators concluded that Leslie Howell and Trevor Buchanan had died together, and that both had been dealing with depression. The deaths were recorded as self-harm. Their families were left to accept that explanation. Colin Howell lived in Coleraine with Leslie and their 4 children, and he was known locally as a successful dentist and an active member of his church. Trevor Buchanan was married to Hazel, who was also one of Colin Howell's patients. What was not known at the time was that Colin Howell and Hazel Buchanan were involved in a relationship. Rather than leave their marriages, Howell devised a plan to remove both spouses. On the night of May 18, 1991, Howell connected a hose to his car's exhaust and ran it through a window into his home. Leslie Howell was asleep. Carbon monoxide filled the room. She died without waking. Howell then moved Leslie's body to Trevor Buchanan's car. He went to the Buchanan home, where Hazel had left a door unlocked. Trevor Buchanan was asleep. Howell used the same method, running carbon monoxide into the room until Trevor died. Once both were dead, Howell placed Leslie Howell and Trevor Buchanan together in the car inside the Buchanan garage. The scene was arranged to support the idea that they had ended their lives together after learning about the relationship between their spouses. Police accepted that explanation. Colin Howell and Hazel Buchanan presented themselves as grieving partners. Over time, they began a public relationship and later married. Some people found the situation uncomfortable, but most believed they had bonded through shared loss. For 19 years, Howell continued his life. He kept his dental practice. He raised his children. He remained active in church. He lived openly with Hazel. No charges were brought. The case files were closed. By 2009, Howell's circumstances had changed. His relationship with Hazel had broken down. He faced financial problems and professional difficulties. At the same time, his religious beliefs began to weigh on him. In January 2009, Howell went to police and confessed. He told officers that he had killed both Leslie Howell and Trevor Buchanan in 1991 and explained how he had staged the scene. His statement reopened 2 cases that had been considered resolved for nearly 2 decades. Authorities ordered exhumations of both bodies. While time had reduced available forensic evidence, pathologists confirmed that the findings were consistent with Howell's account and not with the original conclusions. Hazel Buchanan was arrested and charged as an accessory. Investigators said she had known about the plan and had helped by leaving her door unlocked and ensuring Trevor was alone and asleep. Prosecutors later dropped those charges, stating they could not prove her involvement to the required standard. She faced separate legal issues connected to events after the deaths. For the families, Howell's confession changed everything. Leslie Howell's relatives learned that she had been killed in her sleep by her husband. Trevor Buchanan's family learned that his death had not been his own choice, but the result of an attack by someone he trusted. Grief that had been processed for years returned in a new form, mixed with anger and disbelief. Howell pleaded guilty to both murders. His admission removed the need for a full trial. In December 2010, he appeared before Belfast Crown Court for sentencing. The judge outlined the steps Howell had taken, the length of time he had lived freely, and the harm caused by allowing families to believe false accounts for 19 years. Now, Colin Howell received 2 life sentences to run at the same time, with a minimum term of 21 years before parole could be considered. The court noted that Howell had benefited from years of freedom while raising children, running a business, and presenting himself as a man of faith. Howell said his confession came from a religious conviction and a desire to accept responsibility. Some accepted that explanation. Others believed it came only after his personal circumstances began to collapse. For Leslie Howell's children, the truth meant learning their father had killed their mother. For Trevor Buchanan's family, it meant understanding that someone they knew had arranged his death. Both families had to rebuild their understanding of events long after funerals had ended and lives had moved forward. Colin Howell remains in prison, and his case became one of Northern Ireland's most disturbing examples of long-term deception. It showed how someone could attend funerals, comfort relatives, marry an accomplice, and continue daily life while knowing they had arranged everything. It also raised lasting questions about how easily early assumptions can close investigations, and how difficult it can be to revisit cases once records are settled. Yet while Howell eventually confessed, Ireland's final case involves a man whose release left many families without answers. Case 10, Larry Murphy. Cases like this draw attention not only because of what is proven in court, but because of what remains unanswered. On the night of February 11th, 2000, a young woman left a nightclub in Carlow and began walking home. She did not reach her destination. Larry Murphy, a 35-year-old married carpenter, forced her into his car at knife point and drove her to a remote wooded area in Keelanella Forest. There, Murphy restrained her with cable ties and carried out hours of abuse. He made clear that he intended to kill her when he was finished. She survived because 2 men who had been hunting hares nearby heard muffled cries. They went to investigate and found Murphy's car and the woman inside. Murphy tried to get away. The men restrained him until Garda E arrived. Officers found the victim bound and injured in shock after what she had been through. Medical staff confirmed she had been harmed over several hours. Garda E also noted that Murphy had arrived prepared. He carried cable ties and other items used to restrain her. The location he chose was isolated, far from houses or passing traffic. Either had the hunters not been in that exact area at that moment, the outcome would almost certainly have been different. Murphy was arrested at the scene. Searches of his car and property uncovered additional items of concern, including maps of remote locations and tools that could be used for restraint. Investigators believed this was not an impulsive act. As details of Murphy's arrest became public, Garda E began reviewing unresolved cases involving missing women. Between the mid-1990s and 2000, at least 6 young women had disappeared from an area that became known as the Vanishing Triangle, spanning parts of Leinster. The cases shared troubling similarities. Each woman vanished while traveling alone. No bodies had been found. No witnesses came forward with reliable information. Among the missing were Annie McCarrick, an American student who disappeared in 1993, and JoJo Dullard, who vanished while hitchhiking in 1995. 4 others also disappeared during that period, leaving families without answers. Murphy's arrest placed him immediately on Garda radar in connection with those cases. The woodland area where he attacked the survivor fell within the same region. His method, targeting women who were alone, matched the pattern seen in the disappearances. His stated intent to kill his victim raised further concern. Garda questioned Murphy about the missing women. They showed him photographs and asked about his movements during the relevant years. Murphy chose not to answer questions beyond the crime for which he had been caught. Search teams examined areas Murphy was known to visit. No evidence linking him directly to the disappearances was found. Despite strong suspicion, investigators couldn't connect Murphy to any of the missing women through physical proof. Murphy's case moved forward based on the attack he had been interrupted while carrying out. In 2001, he pleaded guilty, sparing the survivor from having to testify in full. The evidence against him was clear: the victim's account, the hunter's statements, forensic findings, and the restraint materials Murphy brought with him. At that time, Irish law limited sentencing for attempted murder and related offenses. The maximum available term was 15 years. Judge Paul Carney addressed the seriousness of Murphy's actions, stating that the case ranked among the most severe he had encountered. Murphy received the maximum sentence of 15 years, subject to standard remission. That meant he would serve 10 years. The survivor and her family were devastated by the length of the sentence. Advocacy groups questioned how intent could carry a lighter penalty simply because a crime was interrupted by chance. Murphy was released in August 2010 after serving his term. His release caused immediate public concern. Garda took the unusual step of announcing it in advance and confirmed that Murphy intended to relocate. Communities where he was expected to live held protests, demanding that he be kept away from residential areas. The woman who survived the attack had rebuilt her life over the decade Murphy spent in prison. His release forced her to confront the knowledge that he was free. Murphy became subject to monitoring requirements. Though many felt these measures offered limited reassurance, given the nature of his offense and the unresolved disappearances. In the years since, Murphy has kept a low public profile. Reports of his movements have surfaced from time to time, often followed by media attention and renewed calls for stronger controls on released offenders. The most disturbing part of the case remains what cannot be proven. Families of the missing women continue to ask whether Murphy was responsible for their loved ones. Several investigators who worked on the Vanishing Triangle cases have said publicly that they believe Murphy was involved. Yet without confessions, witnesses, or physical evidence, those cases remain officially unsolved. Annie McCarrick's mother spent years hoping for answers before her own death. JoJo Dullard's family has continued searching, even funded private investigations decades later. Fiona Pender, Fiona Sinnott, Deirdre Jacob, and Siobhan Breen also remain missing. Their families live with permanent uncertainty. Murphy's case exposed limits within Ireland's justice system at the time, particularly in sentencing for violent crimes that stop short of death. It prompted changes aimed at increasing penalties and strengthening post-release supervision. Those reforms came too late to extend Murphy's imprisonment or resolve the disappearances. Today, Larry Murphy lives under monitoring, either in Ireland or abroad. The woman who survived his attack carries lasting trauma from an ordeal meant to end her life. 6 families continue to wait for answers that may never arrive. Murphy's case stands apart from the others for one reason. While courts delivered a sentence for what he was caught doing, questions remain about what may have happened before. It is a reminder that outcomes can hinge on minutes and chance encounters, and that legal systems must often work with incomplete records. For investigators, families, and communities, the vanishing triangle remains open history. Across these 10 cases, the pattern is not spectacle. It is proximity. The people responsible were partners, neighbors, colleagues, and familiar faces. Their actions unfolded inside homes, workplaces, farms, and shared spaces. Each case tested police resources, legal limits, and public trust. For victims and families, the impact did not stop with verdicts. Appeals, sentences, and releases became part of their lives. In some cases, answers arrived years later. In others, they have not arrived at all. These stories also show how institutions respond under pressure. Digital records helped establish timelines. Witnesses stepped forward. Courts weighed evidence against legal standards. In several cases, juries reached unanimous decisions. In others, outcomes left communities divided. What remains consistent is that accountability depends on people acting. Officers following leads, experts reviewing data, witnesses choosing to speak, and courts applying the law as written. Not every case delivers full clarity. Not every family receives closure. But each record stands as evidence of what happened, how systems performed, and where limits were reached. Was this justice or limitation? Where did accountability fail first? What should have happened differently? Danger often exists in ordinary places, and systems depend on people choosing to act.